Welcome everybody, it's Lewpac here, back with another Albion Online meta snapshot for the month of July. In this series, we take a look at the current meta compositions and trends that we're seeing in 5v5 combat, primarily GVGs, but this can also affect Hellgates as well for the 5v5 combat. And we see what's changed over the month, what the big classes are, what everybody's playing, and reflect on the balance changes that we've seen since the previous month. Firstly, though, I just want to have a quick apology to all of you guys who follow the channel. There hasn't been an upload for a week or so. There's been a couple of issues with it. Basically, the secondary hard drive on my computer completely died on me, which contained all of my audio recordings, all of my footage that I hadn't uploaded to the Dropbox that I share with my editor. So it set me back, and I had literally no storage space to even record videos for a little while. Also, I've been away at Twitch London, which was a big community meetup for like all the European Twitch people. I was actually DJing at the event. I do DJing as my other job other than content creation. So it's been a crazy week, coupled with the dead hard drive has meant no uploads, but that will change. I'll be back to Albion streaming full-time on Monday coming, and you can expect plenty more videos as well as we continue to churn out the content. So, on with the meta snapshot. In the background of the video, you'll notice there's some fights that have happened recently from various perspectives, so you will see some of these items in action as well. But first, we're going to talk about the tank situation. So, Staff of Balance was running wild for the tanks in the previous meta. There was a huge buff though to Ironclad in the last patch note. So the Ironclad is the Hurricane quarterstaff that knocks everybody all over the place. It's quite powerful knockback now, and we've seen some really good disorientation builds coming out with the Ironclad staff. So people have not only been using the Hurricane, but they've been using the force field on cloth helms, which is the generic cloth helm ability actually, and they're using that coupled with the additional CC of plate armor to knock people as far back as possible. So there's some real good disruption going. Ironclad is seeing a lot of play right now on the tanks. Staff of Balance is still being played, it hasn't really gone out, and actually Heavy Mace, Cancer tanks, the one-handed mace has pretty much disappeared, but Heavy Mace is still quite popular at the moment, especially with nature healers being prevalent, as we'll talk about in a bit. So AoE purging from that battle howl on the Heavy Mace is super powerful. Hammer tanks, seeing the occasional hammer tank with soldier armor build, but they tend to be played in less meta compositions. We're seeing some like crazy double healer, triple soldier armor comps floating around. Some people are experimenting with that, which relies entirely on your enemy charging you up with that soldier's armor. But honestly, the most popular tanks right now are Ironclads and Staff of Balance, with Mace coming in third. Heavy Mace is coming in third. So we're still in a meta where a variety of tanks are being played, but it's still not quite at the balance level I'd like to see. I'd love to see, you know, all three tanking weapons fully viable with various comps. Talking about healers then, so tanks and healers being the main focal point of a lot of lineups. Healing, the Rampant Staff is now officially dead. It got hit quite heavily with the nerf bat in the last patch, changing it from a purgeable hot that just ticks up over time, and actually they've changed it now to a ability on the carpet where the more people in the carpet, the bigger heals are. So it's now a ZVZ focused weapon because you can put loads of people on the healing carpet. But in GVG, the healing output is significantly lower than it used to be. It isn't purgeable, which is nice, but obviously with Ironclads knocking people all over the place, it can be difficult to stay in the carpet. A few teams stuck with it for a little while, but it has now completely dropped out of the meta. So the rampant running rampant, pun intended, that era is now officially over. So what replaces it, you might ask? There's been a few different things floating around. Blight Staff seems to be a very popular choice amongst people. Especially initially, everybody seemed to switch to the Blight Staff, which does the Ruthless Nature AoE heal, but it also makes the caster The caster can move around while channeling Ruthless Nature, but they're not CCable. So against things like Ironclads, Quarterstaffs, stuff like that, it's really useful. You can run through firewalls even with it. I think you just can't be CC'd at all while you've got that Ruthless Nature going. And it's a reasonable amount of healing. The healing isn't that strong, in my opinion, but if you have Adjudicator armor as well, that kind of pushes it just over the edge and makes it that little bit more viable. Also, since it's been a few weeks since the changes, some people have actually gone back to the OG Druidic Staff, which is the Spiritual Seed, charges up for a few seconds on the target, and then does a great big heal on a single target, which is really, really nice for healing somebody who's getting focused, as long as they can stay alive until the seed pops. But the problem with Spiritual Seed is it is purgeable, and there is still a lot of Fiend's Cows. We said earlier, heavy maces as well. So there's a few things around that you're going to have to watch out for if you're trying to use that Spiritual Seed. Now, talking about Holy, a lot of people said that Holy was going to be coming in big in this new meta, and a lot of people gambled on life touches. I know people were stockpiling life touches, getting their artifact Holy up. Also the Redemption Staff, which fires the Holy Orb, which does big AoE heals. Both of those were tipped to be strong in this new meta. The Redemption Staff was used for a little while, but the thing is, I think people found it a little bit clunkier than they would have liked, because you have to fire the orb and it has to hit the target that you need to heal. And, you know, there's the opportunity that with Ironclads and Cloth Helms with the knockback, that people get knocked out of the way so that the orb doesn't hit them, and then you've essentially wasted your E. There's also the chance in, like, small choke point maps that your teammates actually misstep and the E hits them instead of the Holy Orb getting to the intended target. So it's a little bit clunkier, and I think people found that it didn't quite work out as well as they wanted in a combat situation. The healing is impressive, but there's just too much to go wrong with the Redemption Staff right now. The other one then, the Life Touch, got a double range buff, so it went from 3 meters to 6 meters for the Holy Touch. Holy Touch is like a channeled healing. They also made it so that you could also activate the Life Touch E with, even if you were silenced or stunned. So it was basically like a free cleanse as well when you activated it, and nobody could prevent you from channeling it, which in theory seems good, but 6 meters really isn't that much range. And although the Life Touch is super powerful with that E, it still suffers from the channeled Q casting. So to cast Generous Heal, you have to channel it to fire it off, and that's where the issue comes, because Quarterstaff's Cartwheel is still running all over the place. So you're going to get interrupted a lot on your Generous Heal, which then puts it on cooldown, so your healing output really can suffer. Whereas Nature, with its instant cast Q stacks, doesn't have this problem of being interrupted by Quarterstaffs. They can keep on moving as well. They don't have to remain stationary to cast. It's a lot more versatile in a very CC and disruption focused meta right now. So Nature's still winning out. Holy perhaps playable, but I haven't seen anyone rocking it yet. Everybody, all of the big teams, the ones that I watch for like the top end of gameplay, those guys are all still on Nature right now. So just bear that in mind, but maybe in the next snapshot we will have seen Holy come in a little bit. Who knows? Right, talking about DPS then, we'll go over to the melee DPS. The one-handed spear that was dominating the scene, as well as the halberds, both of those took a slight nerf. Halberd wasn't completely destroyed. They just toned down Tear Apart a little bit and reduced the healing reduction on the Q stacks. The one-hand spear, though, seemed to be completely destroyed, coupled with a slight change in the way one-hand IP worked, resulting in a bug that nerfed one-handers for a while. A lot of people were checking out the Trinity Spear, and the Trinity Spear is something I've really liked for a while. I think it's got a lot of options. The mobility There's a mobility ability on the E, which also works as a root, and an AoE attack speed, cast speed, and movement speed buff for your teammates. So, I mean, there's nothing not to like about the Trinity Spear, in my opinion. And a few people have been trying it out, and you've got a lot of variety on the W abilities, which is nice. So it's a very versatile weapon against a lot of people. We've also seen some people going back to the OG glaive that we saw all over the place on launch. So spears are still in a very good place. Axes are still seeing plenty of play. Halberds, bear paws seem to be the go-to axes. Still no battle axes, one-handeds. Carrion callers are seeing a bit of a resurgence. I'm seeing a few people rocking those carrion callers. Obviously more healing reduction from that Morgana's Raven. Definitely helps put the pressure on your opponents. So axes are in a pretty good spot. Swords, however, swords are seeing a tiny bit of play. A few teams are using swords, but they still suffer from the prevalence of spears, meaning the cripple ability can just remove your sword stacks, which severely nerfs your output, as well as obviously other purges such as heavy mace, fiends, cows, etc. Finally, daggers. Now, some people are playing a bit of dagger action in the bruiser spot. We're seeing these suicide bloodletter builds appearing in a few teams. So that's using the Spectre's Jacket for the Ignite aura, which does damage in an AoE, but also damages you. They're combining it with like Gigantify and Giant Steps on the Guardian shoes to sort of pump that health pool up so that you can do as much Spectre's Jacket damage before you have to go back. Some people are also using Spectre's Hood as well to reset the chest for even more AoE. Makes them very, very squishy, but that Bloodletter Execute being in the back line, you know, if somebody does get low, they can pounce on the kill. I like it because it brings a little bit more utility to the Bloodletter, like a bit more damage output, because usually you were doing, you know, you were doing a few stabs, you were doing a little bit of damage, but really you were just there waiting for the executes as well. Now, with the Spectre's Jacket, they actually do a pretty good, consistent, threatening amount of damage. But it's still not core meta right now. I still don't think the meta is entirely settled. But it's seeing play, which is nice. Daggers are not completely useless. So for the melee DPS, there is quite a lot of options right now with axes and spears are still the go-to. Swords and daggers seeing a little bit of play. I'd say swords are probably the more off meta right now with the amount of bloodletters I've seen in the past week. And now we can talk a little bit about the range DPS finally. I'll give a quick shout out to Arcane before we get into that, because that's kind of a class of its own, a support class. Arcane, we were seeing Malevolent Locust all over the place as the big counter to the Rampant Staffs in the previous meta. With Rampants being dead, Malevolent Locust is just gone as well. I've not seen one in play since the changes, and it just seems like, you know, Arcane came in because it was needed to deal with that one thing, the Rampant Staff, and all of a sudden it's not needed anymore. So rip Arcanes. F to pay respects and all that, lads. But yeah, it's a shame, really. I still think Arcane can be very, very versatile, but right now, because people haven't got this massive healing hard reset, there's a lot of focus on just simply killing the targets rather than out-sustaining and removing their buffs and stuff like that, which is why we're seeing things, you know, like Bloodletters and Trinity Spears. They want to lock down a target and kill it rather than purge it and just out-sustain. Range DPS then, the big story of this patch is the bow. The bow got a change to Deadly Shot, and people were like, okay, this is where bows come in, and we are actually seeing a few bows in play right now. Longbow for the massive AoE volley is seeing play. Whispering bows seem quite popular. I've seen a few teams and alt teams running the Whispering bow. I still wouldn't say it's become main meta just yet, but it's definitely heading in the right direction, and it's nice to see bows viable. The absolute like turnaround standout though for the range DPS meta, and actually of this meta for me, is the Frost Staff. The Frost Staff has made a comeback in a big way. In particular, the Great Frost Staff for that big hailstorm ability. 2 AoE drops in a large area that do quite a lot of damage when you're high spec, coupled with the ability to slow bruisers down, and the survivability of frost mages, because they have a blink on their W ability as well as blink shoes. So 2 blink abilities makes them very, very hard to lock down as a tank or as a DPS. So they're very, very survivable. They're able to maneuver quite quickly and get to where they need to just drop those AoEs. They can slow down the bruisers with their Q ability, which means that the bruisers can't stick to their targets. And in all honesty, I'm surprised it took so long for Frost to be a thing again, but everybody's absolutely loving it. The Great Frost is seeing play in many, many top-level comps. On top of that, the Icicle is being used by a few people as well for that big frozen hell ability to slow everybody down, kite them, or trap them. And it's just nice to see Frost back in the meta. Frost counterpart, Fire. Fire is still being played. Firewall's still a very good ability. Fire still offering good damage output. Seems like the one-hand fire is still the go-to. During the one-hand nerf period where there was a slight bug, people did switch over to the Great Fire just to maintain that damage output. But since they fixed the bug with item power on one-hands, people have gone back to the standard one-hand plus off-hand build for fire mages. Again, fire mages are now mostly running blink sandals, the same as every other ranged DPS. Since the blink distance got buffed, they're just better than royals. You can reposition very, very quickly. You're unpredictable how you move, and they just work nicely for keeping a gap between you and any DPS that are trying to kill you. Damage output on fire is good, but it's definitely fallen a little bit behind the wayside now. Frost is slowly overtaking fire, and if it's a 2 backline comp, they're mostly pairing with crossbows. Crossbows haven't actually received much of a change, but they're still seeing plenty of play. We're seeing primarily now one-hand crossbows with Facebreaker offhand for that mix of defense and offense. We're also seeing bolt casters still, but again, bolt casters having to channel that E makes them a little bit vulnerable to the Kerr Staff tanks and that cartwheel. Cartwheel did receive a slight nerf, by the way, and so did Mystic Rocks on the Staff of Balance, but not big enough to drive them out of the meta. So with Cartwheel still running around all over the place, it's often hard to get a full channel off on the bolt casters unless you do silence the tank first with that noise eraser. Heavy crossbow is still very, very viable in my opinion, but people just seem to be preferring the one hand right now because of its massive explosion, the ability to do collateral damage onto the enemy team, particularly on tight space maps like the Resource Watchtower. It offers huge value, and with the E being instacast pretty much, it also means that the one-hand crossbow is very maneuverable. It doesn't have the double blink like Frost does, but you can constantly be moving. You're not having to stand still to channel your Q or your E, which is very, very nice. So finally then, we'll take a look at the Kerr Staff, and the poor old Kerr Staff is still in the same boat as the Arcane. I mean, it offers good utility, it offers good debuffing and consistent damage, but people just aren't finding it bursty enough. I have seen a one-hand curse in action in GVGs in the past weeks, but suffice to say, Curse is not seeing a lot of play right now, which is a stark comparison to 1 year ago when the game launched. We're actually, a week and a half away from the original launch of Albion, where we saw Kerr Staffs practically in every single composition. That huge AoE debuff. I mean, I can't put my finger on why they're not seeing play. The Field of Death on the Demonic is super, super good. Death Curse is definitely a big damage ability, in a similar vein really to the one-hand crossbow. The problem is with the Death Curse versus the one-hand crossbow is the E damage is conditional on stacking your Q, whereas the crossbow is fixed damage. The more consistent the abilities, the more consistently they offer maximum value, the more likely they are to see play. While Death Curse might hit harder in optimal situations, you would take a consistent high damage output every time over variance, because it allows you to be more consistent in your results and always know what to expect when you cast a spell, rather than, oh no, I missed my Q stack, so my E ability did nothing and now I have to wait for the cooldown. So poor old Kerr Staff's just not really seeing play. Armor Shred is very nice, but of course we're getting Armor Shred in the form of Deadly Chop from axes. We're still seeing Mortal Agony. Crossbows are using Sunder Armor. You know, there's still a lot of ways that people are losing resistances, and so just Curse isn't really making it happen right now, and it's a shame. So with that concludes this edition of the Meta Snapshot, guys. I'll be back next month for another one for you. Don't forget there'll be plenty more Albion Online content in the meantime here on my channel, and you can catch my live stream on Twitch 5 days a week, mostly playing Albion. Sometimes I play a few other games just to spice it up and keep it varied, but you can always pop in and say hello, and I'm always up for a chat with viewers and watchers. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel if you haven't already, guys, so you can get more awesome Albion content, and leave a comment below if you've got any thoughts about this current meta. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. My name's Lewpac, and I'll see you next time.